Hello, everybody, and welcome back to our channel. I just wanted to make this hopefully pretty quick, no more than 15-minute long lesson video reviewing the asynchronous topic and unit introduction for our little pit stop over on violence. So this is being made during the 2023-24 school year where you are doing an asynchronous assignment. So let's get to the website and show you what we have here. So as you can see, we for this particular school year, we're doing a little pit stop to violence. We're only going to work on it, give or take about 7 days. So a full week of school and 2 more days over the other than that. And the violent unit page, I'm going to go through this entire page in a moment, but I want to bring your attention um momentarily. Let me see if I can get this marker thing up and running. I want to bring your attention to this assignment right here, the unit assignments having to do with the task sheet project with violence and whatever. You click on this, I don't know what to say. You click on this and it asks you to make a copy. So we can click the word to make a copy for this. And then you'll have your own copy of this task sheet. Some people call it a hyperdoc. It's not really a hyperdoc. Just really a task sheet, an assignment list. And there's a bunch of directions here for you to be able to follow. And it's specifically involving the topics of violence and violence prevention from this particular page, bullying and cyberbullying. So collectively, the 11th grade health education program, in terms of what the state of Pennsylvania suggests, is that it is skills-based. So for violence, instead of learning specifically what violence is and why people commit violence, in 11th grade, what we're supposed to be doing is giving you the tools to be able to prevent violence and make healthier decisions concerning violence and safety, and helping teach you self-defense. So most of these topics realistically are taught in middle school and ninth grade health education, but you don't have health education until 11th grade in the Arts Academy of Benjamin Rush. So this task sheet is pretty much a review. So if you go down and look at the review sheet, there are different sections. Section 1 is about violence terms, and it talks to you about the terms associated with violence, which are on the top of the page. So what you're looking at is basically this section about violence, questions for me to consider, violence defined and explained, and then the top of this section of this Google sheet here that's embedded into the website. And then you go into, it tells you to skip the section that says why, because we are going to do that in small groups in class. And then task 4, it asks you to go to the feature video section, and it tells you to watch one of the featured videos. So we scroll down here and we're skipping the why, as we said. Featured articles and resources. It doesn't tell you to skip that, but we're skipping that too. Sorry. And then featured videos. It tells you to watch one of the 4 featured videos and then write a little thing about it. And then it goes and asks you to do section 2, bullying, which is a whole other topic page. You can click this link to get there quickly, and then it'll go and I'll take you to that particular web page, and you can go and specifically look up bullying information. And then after you're done the bullying section with some tasks and things to do with extra credit, there's a cyberbullying section, and then at the very end there is a quiz for you to take. Make sure that you use your notes. So as everybody well knows, bullying, even though it sounds like such a elementary term, is something that's not elementary. It's something that's still ongoing. And at our particular school, although there is sometimes in-person things that happen, violence is not always bullying. And so listening to this right off the top of my head, the difference between defining violence and defining bullying is always that one party has either a real or perceived power that's bigger. I might as well bring up the bullying page just to get this topic. It either has a real or perceived imbalance of power, and it is repeated. It happens over time. So you target an individual based on size, based on perception of coolness, based on what they're doing, whether it be like athletes or not athletes, and or race or gender identity or sexual orientation, and you pick on somebody because of this indifference and imbalance of power. So the keys to the definition of bullying is that it's intentional harm repeated because of an imbalance of power, and that's real or perceived. So that's the difference between bullying and random violence. Violence, if you really want to sum it up, it has one word in common. Let's see if you can figure out what that word is. There are some questions that you should be answering. What is my individual role in stopping violence? How do I keep myself from violence? Why do people resort to violence or commit acts of violence? What is the difference between aggression and violence? Is violence, not aggression, ever justified or necessary? And something to consider with that as we get into the assignment about the constructive responses and writing prompts, which for the sake of argument, I'll just click on here and show you that that's also an assignment that's in Google Classroom. But in any case, these are things that we need to answer in class. So why do people commit acts of violence? We're going to look at the psychology behind it really quickly on the surface, And then what is my individual role? What are some things you specifically can do to limit and prevent violence, and also to keep yourself safe from violence? So violence displayed, if you go into the dictionary, it is the use of physical force so as to injure, abuse, damage, or destroy. You can read that. That about sums it up, but you notice one thing, that it only speaks about physical acts of violence. And we know that violence can be verbal. So a more detailed high school level definition of violence comes from the World Health Organization, which says violence is the intentional, and sometimes, before I read it, sometimes Zoom does not go and whatever reason, and I don't know why, sometimes words on a web page will show up like blurry. So if it is, it's right here. It says, so look at this particular section of the website and figure it out. In any case, the intentional use of physical force or power, threatened or actual. So like actual would be physical violence, but threatened is verbal violence against oneself, another person, or against a group or community that either results in or has a high likelihood of resulting in injury, death, psychological harm. So now we're talking emotional violence, maldevelopment, or deprivation, which is basically another word for neglect. And then this image over to the left here, so I'll just draw that real quick. This image to the left right here, that is specifically speaking about interpersonal violence. And the World Health Organization, if you were to go to the article, and if you click on this link, it's for some, I don't know why, it's not acting like, I have to take that link out of the page. It's not working anymore. But if you go to the World Health Organization's definition of violence, then where was I? According to the World Health Organization, anyway, interpersonal violence. They go into 3 different types of violence. So there's self-directed violence, so that includes self-harm, and we don't need to get into that in this particular video. Collective violence, so that's between groups. That's typically for the World Health Organization, that talks about wars, but in our country, that would also include gang fights, and sometimes it's opposing sides of non-peaceful protests. So you start with a peaceful protest, and there's just words and rhetoric and sign holding and chants and songs, but sometimes they're not peaceful, and you have 2 opposing sides. So that would be collective violence with 2 specific groups. target each other. So most of the time internationally, it would be wars, and domestically, it would be group or gang fights or things like that. But then there's interpersonal violence, and interpersonal violence, which is the most common, is when there is a victim and an aggressor. And in bullying, that victim gets targeted um, over time, over and over and over. And in not bullying, it's random. Sometimes it happens and sometimes it doesn't. There's another chart. So that chart above explains the international. And wow, that doesn't work either. I'm gonna have to get rid of both of those links. In any case, moving right along, this spreadsheet is basically a review of a middle school activity. If you had health education in the school district of Philadelphia at some point in probably sixth grade, you were given categories of violence, and you were given a definition of violence, probably from a Glencoe health textbook, that said an act of intentional harm usually done to another person, group, or object. And the reason why it says usually is because they do include acts of self-harm in there too as violence. But in any case, the above definition can be summed up as hurting someone else, something else, or oneself, which is a reminder, is also the definition of negative expressions of emotions and feelings, including anger. So we talked a lot about anger and how people react to anger with rage earlier in the year, and that basically is violence. So in any case, that's the middle school definition. So now we have a Merriam-Webster definition, the World Health Organization definition, and the middle school an act of intentional harm definition. And then the categories of violence, if you were in middle school, you heard physical, verbal, emotional. You probably had sexual violence as a category. And most middle school teachers won't include dating, intimate partner, or domestic violence. Right around 1997, 1998, dating violence was added as a category of violence. And some textbooks picked it up on it and some did not. And these are pretty universally recognized. As of 2017, many professional organizations do include domestic violence or intimate partner relationships as a category of violence. Even the World Health Organization, which does them differently, includes it. So you have family or partner violence, community violence, and the family or partner could be to a child, to an elder, or to a partner. So they even include that. And with the community, it's acquaintance or stranger. They don't use the word friend ever because they assume you're not going to be violent towards your friend. So physical violence is there, sexual violence is there, psychological violence is how the World Health Organization combines verbal and emotional. And deprivation or neglect is technically emotional violence. It's also physical. So when you get down to the categories in middle school, you probably did a little small group project on chart paper or in your notebooks, or maybe on a handout where you were supposed to do examples of each category. And physical ones are easy. You have things like punching, hitting, slapping, kicking, punching, pushing, etc., use of a weapon, and with the intent of using that weapon to harm someone. And some people do include drug abuse, and self-harm can also be considered physical violence towards oneself. And then verbal violence are quite simply words that hurt. But I have to make sure that you understand something. Like, to be violent, there's a key word in the sentence of all of the definitions, and it's intentional. Whether it's bullying, whether it is the World Health Organization, whether it's middle school definition, Merriam-Webster doesn't use it, but it's assumed. Violence is intentional. So if I or somebody else says something that you don't like, it's not violence towards you. If somebody gets triggered nowadays and gets upset or emotionally insulted, for lack of a better term, that isn't necessarily violent. Now, depending on what the person says, it doesn't mean that it's right. Sometimes it's ignorance, sometimes it's stupidity, sometimes it's a person not only being uneducated, but frankly being abrupt and mean. They may not have a buffer from their mouth to their face. When talking about things like racism, we often talk about the phrase microaggressions. Well, microaggressions aren't so micro to the person that you're talking about, to the group of people you're talking about. So Really what needs to happen in those situations is the person needs to be educated and recognize that what they said and why they said is insulting, and they may not listen, they might not believe you, and they might not care. That's not violence. All those things are intentional. Um, yeah, so the key about verbal violence is that it's intentional. So, um, and there's another conversation you would have if this was middle school, where you'd be talking about the difference between teasing and insulting. So, teasing, and to simplify it, as if you were in fifth grade, teasing is you're laughing with the person and together, and insulting you're not. And then we get into emotional violence, and without getting into too a big of a definition with it here online, emotional acts of violence can be physical or verbal, but they're deep scarring. They are intentional, and they're meant to cause long-term emotional change. So things like bullying, discrimination, harassment, stalking, intimidation, racism, those kinds of things are all examples of emotional violence, especially when they're blatant and targeted towards individuals. And that's when we get into cyberbullying. So at our school, there's not that many acts of blatant targeted harassment or bullying, but unless sometimes it happens after I don't know if the relationship has a breakup, but um, there is cyberbullying. There are cyber attacks. There are people that target individuals and then really forcefully pick on them. So there's also some links down there talking about how emotional acts of violence and harassment can cause PTSD and things like that. Fourth category of violence is, of course, sexual, and this is not the sexual violence topic today. We'll talk about that in the sexual health unit, but obviously you can see that that's sexual harassment, sexual assault, or rape. That's sexual violence, which obviously can be physical, verbal, and emotional all at the same time. And then the fifth category that's sometimes not included is dating, intimate partner, or domestic violence, which again is included in the World Health Organization's definitions, but not always in everybody else's. As you scroll down, there is a PowerPoint saying the reasons why people commit acts of violence. We're not going to go over that in this video because you will be doing that or did that in some cases already when you watch this in class in small groups. It's coming up with the main reasons why, and there's also a link to a master list at the end of the slideshow. And then there's a featured articles and resources. There's another slideshow, very, very simple one, but talking about tips about personal protection and safety when self-defense is actually self-defense, and things like that. Then there's some articles about violence prevention and definition and topography of violence and whatnot. The featured videos that we told you to look at, and then details and data from the Youth Risk Behavior Survey if you want to go and use that. So you will be doing the review and the definitions that we just did here, bullying and cyberbullying review on your own in class. We're going to talk about reasons why, ways to protect. We're going to talk about gun violence in America and what specifically the Castle Doctrine is in the state of Pennsylvania. And then you'll be able to see that video of the landmark court case for LGBT bullying and violence, where the guy named Jamie Navazny won a lawsuit against his schools for failure to protect him as a protected group. So if you have any questions, feel free to email me, and thanks.